Chapter 16, Eventually. But soon his parents left him alone again and didn't seem to be concerned about where he was. He could be sitting in plain sight in the living room, and they would both just walk by without acknowledging him or saying a word to him. Or he could spend an entire afternoon sitting in his tree. By now it had become his tree, and they didn't seem to miss him. In fact, Hubie felt that they would rather he were not around, and he found in that fact a great contentment, because they just seemed troubled when they had to interact with him. He soon came to feel that the great oak was his real parents, and it held him, supported him, provided him with a place of safety, and an experience of his own presence in relationship to something strong and rooted and patient. It was the most solid sense of parents he had ever had. It demanded nothing of him, yet was always there, available, willing to hold him, and it asked nothing of him that he was not spontaneously willing to share with it. It did not pry or ask questions or want answers for everything. It was this wordless relationship that Hubie prized so, yet the relationship was alive and solid and deeply connected. Anyone observing Hubie would have said that he was isolated and that he had no relationship to people. Hubie did not feel himself to be isolated, but he himself would have acknowledged that people were a mystery. He had already experienced such an intensity of love from his two mothers that was unrelated to anything that he did. The love was just there without asking. And then he had suddenly been whisked away from these two loving mothers by people he did not know. And he had been placed, yes, placed, the way someone would park a car in a garage and leave it, into this new home with the first adult man he had ever had contact with, where there had been little connection to him. The man seemed rigid and governed by unspoken rules that were never really communicated, yet he acted as if Hubie should have known the rule book already. The woman, the new mother, was a bit warmer than the man, but she also seemed to be governed by the man's rule book, and he experienced periods of physical isolation where whatever he did seemed to make no difference. However, he did learn that making too much noise was definitely taboo. Up in the tree he had learned to be noiseless when other people were around, yet he could talk to the tree in whispers, and the tree seemed to whisper back. Or was it just the wind murmuring? The tree also told him that he was good, and that the tree also did not understand most humans, although it did understand the birds and the small animals that would crawl around it. And Hubie was one of the small animals that it understood. The whispering tree told Hubie that it loved him, and that he was always welcome, and that it would always have a place where he could sit comfortably out of the view of people. Eventually a day came where the two grown-ups were gone for a very long time. They had left in the morning and had not returned until it was almost dark. And when they returned, they brought something with them all wrapped up in a blanket. Hubie stood on the edge of their presence and saw that there was a tiny being wrapped in the blanket. And he saw that it made quiet little noises, and that the two grown-ups would exult over the small noises that it made. They put it in the room that Hubie had initially had, and would sit in there with it for hours, and they would bring it into the living room or kitchen, and look at it in a kind of stunned silence, and the man and woman would make little noises to each other whenever the new being made a noise of its own. They seemed to be totally captivated by the small blanket being. They kept Hubie at a distance from it, although he was very curious, and he would gain a peek from time to time. Eventually he realized that it was a tiny little person, and there was something about it that reminded him of himself in a very deep way, at a level of feeling that he had not experienced before, of being very curious about it and attracted to it, and at the same time repelled by its helplessness and by the noises that it made that sounded like the squeaking of a small animal. But it was seldom that the grown-ups let Hubie get near it. Hubie felt that somehow the presence of this tiny being created an even greater distance between him and the grown-up people. But the tree always welcomed him and held him and told him that the tiny being was his little brother. Chapter 17, Brother. Hubie had very strange feelings about what the tree had told him. A little brother? How could that tiny bundle be a little brother? Hubie felt a warmth in his chest as he listened to the tree. Something made him very happy. But what was a little brother? Was it another boy like him? He felt a curious anger about this little bundle being given the room that had been his. Would the little bundle also take this tree away from him? This tree? His tree? The tree was the only place Hubie felt at home. The tree held him, embraced him, provided a place where he could just be, and a place where he felt understood and cared for. Would the little brother also take these things away from him? Warm tears came out of Hubie's eyes, but why was he crying? Certainly that little bundle couldn't climb a tree like Hubie could. There was nothing to cry about. At the same time, Hubie had visions of himself and little brother going for long walks, even far away, and he felt a warm closeness to little brother and a feeling of caring for and teaching the little bundle. His feelings seemed to bump into each other and squeeze his chest. It felt like his chest was stretching, but it also hurt. Chapter 18, Touching. At first, Hubie was only allowed to look at the tiny little bundle, but he was told not to touch it. Only mother and father were allowed to touch it. Why? Why couldn't Hubie touch it? He didn't understand. He was told that he would get germs on it if he touched it. Germs? What were germs, anyway? He had never seen any germs. Was it okay that germs were on himself but couldn't be on the little bundle? He was told he always had to wash his hands when he was around the little bundle. But why? Was he now suddenly dirty, now that the little bundle had arrived? It sounded to him like made-up stories, stories that had been made up by mother and father just in order to keep him from touching the little bundle. Hubie felt frustrated and angry. Little Bundle had brought lots of rules into the house, rules that Hubie was supposed to obey, but no one else was. He watched closely, but he never saw mother or father wash their hands before they touched the little bundle. Whenever little bundle cried or made the smallest sound, they immediately picked him up. Hubie felt a hotness in his face when he thought of this. When he had first come to this house, he could cry and no one ever touched him. In fact, he had felt ignored and avoided whenever he cried. Why was little Bundle treated so differently? Chapter 19, Holding. Hubie was puzzled, but more than anything he was hurt. The sight of little Bundle made his face hot and also brought tears to his eyes. He felt hurt by mother and father, and he felt hurt by little Bundle. So he climbed his tree and sat in his favorite perch and cried and cried. When he finally took a deep breath, he found that his face and the collar of his shirt were wet with tears. Then a sudden jolt went through him. I will hold you like you want to hold little Bundle. Who had spoken? Was it the tree? Was this possible? This was different from the sound of the wind that he had previously imagined to be whispered words. Hubie thought only people could speak, yet he had definitely heard the words. And they were loud. Was it true? Did he want to hold little Bundle the way the tree was holding him? Did he want to be like a tree for little Bundle? Hubie was so shocked that he was shaking. He looked around. Was someone up here in the tree with him? Carefully he whispered, Tree, did you just speak to me? The answer seemed to come from all around and also from deep inside. Yes, I just spoke to you. I've been holding you for a long time, and you would love to hold little Bundle just the way I hold you. Hubie stopped breathing. This was certainly not him answering, and there was no one else around. He was all alone outside, sitting up high in the big tree, and he knew that if he held Little Bundle, he would feel just like the big tree, protective, caring, loving. He also remembered how helpless he had felt when he first came to live with Mother and Father, and how he longed to be loved the way his two mothers had loved him. But instead he had felt alone, cold, avoided, and uncared for. It was not until he had climbed the big tree that he had once again felt the kind of loving presence of another. And this is what he wanted to be for Little Bundle. Chapter 20. Wonder. That evening was spent in wonder. Hubie was silent, lost in a kind of awareness that he had never experienced before. He didn't have words for where he found himself. It was like a safe bubble. He saw Mother and Father holding Little Bundle and cooing and awing, and he understood that they were in a kind of bubble themselves. Hubie felt so wonderfully held by his own bubble that he could appreciate where they were. They all ate supper together, and Hubie was not disturbed by the fact that he received almost no attention from them, because they were so focused on Little Bundle. Instead, he was feeling something wonderful. He was feeling that he was alive, and that aliveness was something very special. And he understood that Mother and Father were fascinated by the aliveness of Little Bundle, as if this tiny aliveness had suddenly appeared out of nowhere and come into their home. Little Bundle could do almost nothing. He could not climb trees. He couldn't even walk or crawl. He could make strange noises that immediately drew the attention of the two grown-ups like nothing Hubie had seen before. And Hubie understood that it was the aliveness of this Little Bundle that was so magical, so stunning, so deeply valuable. Hubie spent the evening in a kind of daydream where he was the big brother, and he would teach Little Bundle how to be in the world outside, the world that he had come to know so well, especially the world of the tree that he so dearly loved, a tree that spoke. But Hubie would tell no one about the fact that the tree had spoken to him. It would be his secret, and the tree's secret. But when Little Bundle was big enough, Hubie would introduce him to his tree and help him to learn to climb it, and then reveal the secret that he would keep until then, the secret of a tree that could speak. Chapter 21, Connection. The change that Hubie felt as a result of discovering that his tree could talk was unimaginable. He was no longer sad or sour. He no longer needed anything from Mother and Father. He was delighted to watch how quickly Little Bundle grew and changed. And with these changes that Hubie felt, there seemed to be a whole new energy in the house. Mother and Father seemed to be more relaxed, no longer finding so much to criticize about Hubie, and they included Hubie more in their presence with Little Bundle. And the entire house seemed larger and to have more space. Hubie began to clear the table after supper, and his room was neater, and he no longer felt so easily frustrated. Hubie was also delighted to recognize a feeling that would happen whenever Little Bundle took notice of him. There was a brightening in the air, a warming that filled the entire room, a deep delight that would suddenly grab Hubie, and it all had to do with a connection. The connection happened deep within Hubie, and also deep within Little Bundle, and it seemed to be a mutual connection, like they were feeling the same thing at the same time, like two lights that brightened each other, each one making the other shine more deeply. And it felt like this shining went deeper inside of Hubie with every successive time that it happened. The deepening was also sustained. That is, it seemed to pervade time. It would last longer each time that it occurred, until eventually it seemed to blanket Hubie's entire day. Chapter 22, Planning. And Hubie was surprised at how fast Little Bundle grew and changed. He was soon gurgling sounds that Hubie seemed to understand, and he began reaching for things and reaching for Hubie's hand and crawling little by little until he could scoot clear across the floor. And every now and then Mother and Father would even leave Hubie to look after little Bundle, and Hubie delighted greatly in this, and even felt that Mother and Father were grateful for his presence. But what delighted Hubie more than anything was thinking that eventually, when little Bundle had grown big enough, he would teach him how to climb the tree that grew in the backyard, that great oak, and that Hubie would let him in on the secret that the great tree could talk. But for now Hubie kept these plans secret, and only thought about them when he was alone. At these times there would be a great warming in his heart as he planned the things that he could teach little Bundle that no one else could. Chapter 23, Growing. Little Bundle grew faster than anyone expected. He was walking before he was even 1 year old, and he and little Hubie had become fast friends. Each ignited a glow in the other. Hubie had a strange feeling that in some way he had known little Bundle long ago, at a time before he could even remember, and there was a sense that he had always been searching for him, and now here he was. They both delighted in playing together, and in some curious way could understand each other before they had even finished speaking. They were also aware that Father and Mother knew nothing about their special relationship, but sometimes remarked that they were too wild together. Hubie never experienced it as wildness, but as a deep aliveness that somehow awoke in him. As their relationship grew, both Father and Mother began looking upon Hubie with strange suspicion. Hubie would not have called it suspicion. He didn't even have a word for it. But it felt like there was a sharp energy in their look, an energy that somehow cut right between Hubie and little Bundle. They began insisting that Hubie stop calling his little brother Little Bundle and begin calling him by his right name. But nothing sounded more right to Hubie than Little Bundle. It was as if this name enveloped an entire host of feelings and warmth, and the name Michael, that his parents demanded Hubie call him, was cold and flat and without feeling, empty in some way, imposed from the outside rather than having grown with this little Bundle of joyful life. Although Hubie did as his parents wished, he continued to call him Little Bundle under his breath. And Little Bundle always called Hubie B, and Hubie was delighted with this. Hubie, without even realizing it, had been including Little Bundle in so many of his future plans. Hubie would help him learn how to climb the great oak in the backyard, Hubie's tree, and how to sit silently in it, and to talk to the tree, and listen to its answers. Hubie never thought of this as plans for the future, but as a reality that was just waiting to happen, waiting until Little Bundle had grown enough for it to actually take place. But Hubie kept it as a surprise. He could already anticipate Little Bundle's great delight to be able to sit high up in the tree and to wonder at the view from there and to feel how hidden it was. But the best would be when Little Bundle first heard the tree speak. This would be truly glorious, for without even realizing it, Hubie had an entire future already mapped out in his mind that included his soft, tender relationship with Michael. Chapter 24, Finally. Michael stared in awe the very first time that Hubie scrambled up the tree and disappeared in its branches. He stared and Hubie called back, but Michael couldn't see Hubie at all. The branches and leaves were so thick. Then Hubie scrambled back down, and Michael just looked at him as if something magical had taken place. All Michael could say then was, "Me, me, me." "You can't climb until you're bigger," Hubie said. And in that instant, becoming bigger was Michael's goal in life. He desperately wanted to climb that tree for one reason, because he always wanted to do whatever Hubie could do. And Hubie was always happy to help Michael in any way he could. So from then on, whenever they were playing outside in the backyard, Hubie would suddenly scramble up the tree, and Michael would try to follow him. But Michael was too small and weak to do so, although he struggled mightily to follow. From then on, Michael climbing the tree became the goal for both of them. But one other unanticipated complication happened. At supper, Michael was so excited that all he could talk about was tree, tree, tree. Their parents looked at Michael and then at Hubie with that cutting look that Hubie knew so well, and said, "You didn't take Michael up the tree, did you?" Hubie, of course, said no, because that was the truth. But his parents didn't seem to believe him. They both knew, however, that Michael was too small to climb the tree by himself, so they were caught between believing Hubie and not believing him. And then they both, almost with the same words, said, "Hubie, you are never to climb that tree again. It's too dangerous for Michael." Hubie, of course, protested. "I didn't take him up the tree." But the parents were adamant, and almost in unison said, "You are never to climb that tree again. Do you understand?" Hubie was so shocked by this pronouncement that it was not anything he had ever anticipated, and he could not even imagine never climbing the tree again. He tried to argue with his parents, promising never to climb it when Michael was around, but they both just said, "It doesn't matter whether he is around. You are never to climb that tree again. Do you understand?" They were so intense and so loud, and even though it didn't make any sense to Hubie, he just said, "Yes, I understand." But he was hot and humiliated. It didn't make any sense. Arguments and reasons kept running around in his head. But he just looked at Michael, who himself couldn't understand why his parents were being so loud and so demanding. Tears came to Hubie's eyes, and his parents told him to leave the table. He left the table and went to his room, lay down on his bed, and under his breath he swore that he would climb the tree any time he wanted to, regardless of what his parents had said. The determination in Hubie was rock hard and unmovable. He would climb his tree. Chapter 25, Fall. But as time went on, and in spite of his determination, Hubie found himself climbing the tree less and less, and never when Michael was present. When they were outside in the backyard, Michael would say, "Climb tree, Bee," and Hubie would say, "No, not today." But they would continue to play together, running around the tree and having fun outdoors, and Michael continued to grow bigger and stronger. Michael grew so fast that Hubie was surprised one day to observe that Michael was actually making some headway, scurrying up the great old oak tree. Michael was halfway up it, and Hubie felt something very strange. He felt very warm, and sweat poured out of his forehead before he even realized what he had done. He was climbing behind Michael, urging him upward. "You can do it! You can do it!" Suddenly they both found themselves up in the branches of the tree, and the view was spectacular. All Michael could say was, "Ooh, ooh, ooh," as he looked around. He had never before been so high. And Hubie was delighted. He had known that Michael would love to be up high in a tree, in his tree, and he felt their friendship, their brotherhood being glued fast together up here in this great tree. Hubie felt like he had arrived at a place within himself where he felt completely whole. It felt like hours that they scurried around from branch to branch, looking in every direction, and Hubie felt like he had shared a part of himself with Michael. But suddenly, out of nowhere, the voice of Father. "You aren't up in that tree. No, 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 come down immediately. You were told never to climb that tree again, and never to take Michael up into it. Come down right now." Hubie was shocked, terrified. He had never heard Father in such anger before. Hubie and Michael both looked down at Father and realized they had to descend. But then Hubie understood that even though the tree was easy to climb, it was much harder to get down out of it. And for Hubie it had required many tries in order to find his way down. Michael had never climbed down before. Startled, Michael began to slip, and Hubie reached out for him desperately, but it was too late. Michael's hand slipped on the branch he was holding, and he crashed to the ground. There was an awesome stillness as Father ran up to Michael, lying on the ground. Blood was streaming from his head, and he was lying completely still. Hubie raced down out of the tree, ran to Michael, crying, "No, no, no!" Hubie put his arms around Michael, but he did not move. He had never cried so deeply in his life. Before he could really understand what was happening, the ambulance had arrived and Michael was being taken away. Mother and Father were in the ambulance with Michael, and Hubie was alone at home. Chapter 26, The Cold. It was late and dark by the time Mother and Father returned home without Michael. Hubie was sitting in the cold living room. There was no light on. Hubie felt like all the lights had gone off in the whole world. He thought he would be comforted by the return of Mother and Father, until he heard Father's voice. "You pushed him! I saw it! You killed him!" Hubie could not believe his ears. He was shattered by the fall, but then to be accused of having pushed Michael when he was reaching for him, trying to hold him, made no sense to him at all. He felt his whole body go cold, frozen, numb. Nothing made any sense anymore. Father spoke to Hubie at great length and very loud, but Hubie did not hear a word. All he felt was coldness, like he had been suddenly ejected out of the warmest place he had ever known, and that he would never feel warm again. Chapter 27, The Deep. Hubie did not hear anything the next day, even though Father spoke at length to him. He felt like he was in a deep, dark tunnel, and all the sounds were somehow above the ground, but he was so deep that they did not reach him. He didn't really know whether he was awake or asleep, and it really didn't matter to him. There was no place he wanted to be. In fact, he wanted to be any place else other than where he was. But the deadness, the dullness, was perhaps better than any other place he could be. There was much hustle and bustle about the house, but Hubie didn't really notice any of it. Some people came and spoke to him, but he was not aware of what they said, nor of how he answered them, if he did. He felt like he was wrapped up like a mummy, already dead, and that he couldn't move. That is, until he heard the machinery outside. At first it was like a car starting up, except that Hubie suddenly realized it was very loud. It didn't make any sense. Why would a car be so loud? He could hear people outside, and he wondered who they were and why they were here, but it didn't make any sense to him. It was not until he heard the strange mechanical whir that his eyes suddenly opened, and for a moment he became alive again, desperately alive. He ran outside, shouting, "No, no, no!" He couldn't believe his eyes. His tree was moving, crashing in slow motion to the ground. It had been cut off at the trunk, and men with motorized saws stood around, ready to begin cutting the branches. Hubie ran to the tree, even though people tried to stop him, and he hugged it desperately, even as it slowly fell. A man grabbed him and held him away from it, just as the great tree crashed to the ground. "Crazy kid, what's he trying to do?" Hubie just fell to the earth, just as the tree had, and cried until his face was covered with mud. Chapter 28. The Deadness. Many different people talked to Hubie, some in uniforms, some in doctor's coats, some in suits, but he did not really understand what they said to him, nor what they asked him, and it really did not matter to him anyway. His life was over. Not only was Little Bundle dead, but his great tree was also dead. His own life did not matter anymore. He felt that he had also died with them. So nothing else mattered. He did not pay attention when the people took him away from Mother and Father. He didn't say goodbye to them. He didn't even pay any attention to where the people took him. He was interviewed over and over again by people who never reached him, never touched him, and whom he never felt. In fact, he did not even feel himself. He also was dead, just like little Bundle, just like the great tree that had held him so lovingly. His life beyond this point did not feel like a life. It felt like a stupor, as if he'd just responded to whatever anyone said automatically, without thinking and without caring. After a short time in a dormitory where other boys also lived, and where he was interviewed daily by a man wearing a white coat, he was placed with a family that was very strict. The strictness did not faze him. It seemed to provide a structure within which he didn't have to feel or think. Everything was already determined, and he quickly learned the routine that was expected of him. He had no inner glow, nor purpose of his own, and surviving was simpler than not surviving. He no longer thought about little Bundle, nor about the great tree. His vision did not extend beyond whatever he was asked to do, or was supposed to do, and so he attended classes, memorized words and thoughts, and gave them back to the teacher when asked. But he never volunteered anything, and so he was judged to be an average student who could eventually function adequately in a job that did not require any initiative. And before he realized it, he was out of school and in a job that was repetitive and predictable. This is the end of Book 5. Thank you for listening. I am the author and the reader, Steve Gallegos, and I invite you to continue on with Book 6, Bear Man. Thank you for listening.